Hey, you know when a news story just kind of stops you in your tracks?
Yeah.
That's how I felt reading about this legal fight brewing. We're talking about a real clash of principles here,
Ah,
hinging on fairness, equality, even safety in women's sports.
the DOJ in Maine thing.
Exactly. It's all kicking off with a lawsuit the Department of Justice has, well, slapped on the state of Maine.
It really grabbed my attention, too. What's fascinating, I think, is how this one legal move brings together so many different threads, civil rights, education systems, and this whole evolving world of sports. This isn't just a Maine story, you know? It feels like a window into a much bigger national conversation that people are probably seeing everywhere.
Totally. So for this deep dive, we're going to try and unpack exactly what the DOJ is saying in this lawsuit against Maine, specifically looking at Title IX and women's sports. And if you're thinking, Title IX, Maine, what's the big deal for me? Well, stick with us. This situation, believe it or not, shines a really bright light on how a key law, one designed to stop sex discrimination in schools, is being interpreted and seriously debated right now.
Yeah, debated is the word.
It touches on core ideas of equal opportunity, and honestly, what happens here could have a domino effect way beyond Maine.
At its heart, you see a real disagreement emerging. The federal government, the DOJ, has a very specific way they think Title IX should apply here to women's sport.
In Maine.
And from the DOJ's perspective, Maine just isn't following that line. So our goal today is to really dig into the main arguments the DOJ is making and understand the sequence of events that led us here. We're mainly looking at the CBS News report for the details.
Okay, so let's get down to it. What exactly is the DOJ accusing Maine of doing wrong? Like, what's the core claim?
The central accusation is pretty straightforward, actually. The DOJ claims Maine is actively discriminating against women in sports.
Discriminating against women.
Yes. Their argument, based on the lawsuit, is that Maine has failed to protect women in women's sports, and this failure is a clear violation of Title IX. So you see, the core idea here isn't just about who's playing on which team. It's about, well, fundamentally redefining sex-based discrimination under Title IX in this specific context.
Yeah.
That could affect any policy based on biological sex distinctions, really.
And they didn't exactly mince words, did they? I remember reading that quote from Attorney General Bondi, something about not standing by when women face discrimination in sports.
Right, and she specifically mentioned personal safety, too.
Which adds another really significant layer to this, doesn't it? Safety.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Bundy's focus on personal safety, it really highlights a key part of the DOJ's argument. They aren't just talking about fair participation. They're framing this partly in terms of potential physical risks.
Okay.
And to understand why they're taking this stance, you have to look at how they're interpreting Title IX right now.
Which, as the report laid out, is very specific. It seems tied to President Trump's executive order from February.
Exactly. That executive order basically directed agencies to interpret Title IX as preventing transgender girls and women from competing on female sports teams.
Ah, okay.
So the DOJ is operating under this interpretation. They're arguing that allowing transgender athletes on women's teams undermines the law's original purpose, preventing sex discrimination, defined by them in this context as protecting opportunities for biological females.
And that order had consequences attached, right? Like federal funding.
Yes, it did. Potential loss of federal funding for states that don't comply. That was the threat.
So if I'm following this, the DOJ is saying Maine's policies, by allowing or requiring, as they put it, girls to compete against boys and girls competitions, violates this specific interpretation of Title IX.
That's their argument.
It almost sounds counterintuitive if you think about Title IX historically trying to create more opportunities for girls and women.
Well, that's precisely where the tension is. The DOJ argues that including individuals who are biologically male on female teams is discrimination against biological females. They literally said Maine is openly and defiantly flouting anti-discrimination law.
Wow. Openly and defiantly.
It's strong language. It's definitely a different spin on how Title IX's protection of women is often viewed.
And they pointed to actual situations. The article mentioned 3 examples.
Yeah, 3 examples of boys participating in girls' sports is how the DOJ put it in the filing, according to the report. We don't have the specifics of those cases from this source, but pointing to them is key legally.
To show it's not just theoretical harm.
Exactly. They need to demonstrate concrete instances where they believe this sex discrimination, as they define it, is happening. And their final line in the suit about stopping Maine's unapologetic sex discrimination against female student athletes really drives home their position.
This whole thing, It feels like it has a bit of a history. It didn't just pop up, right? The report called the lawsuit an escalation.
You're right, it's been building. There was that tense moment mentioned in the report back in February between President Trump and Maine Governor Janet Mills.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. He threatened funding.
Directly threatened withholding federal funds if Maine didn't get in line with the executive order on transgender athletes.
And Governor Mills, she's a Democrat. She didn't exactly fold, did she? Her response was pretty memorable.
See you in court.
Yeah,
Very blunt.
yeah.
And then you had Education Secretary Linda McMahon weighing in, hoping Governor Mills wouldn't let a political feud hurt students.
So different ways of framing it, clearly.
Definitely. The federal government framing it as upholding civil rights and fair play, while Maine likely sees it more through state rights, maybe a different view of non-discrimination.
It sounds like the DOJ felt they'd already tried talking. Bondi said something about exhausting other options.
Yeah, Attorney General Bondi stated they had exhausted every other remedy and had repeatedly notified Maine of its infractions, urging changes. That's pretty standard before filing a major suit like this.
Trying to show they didn't just jump to court.
Right. And the report also notes the administration had already started pulling some grants to Maine through other agencies. So they were applying pressure in different ways before this lawsuit.
But Maine hasn't just been sitting back. The report says they got a temporary restraining order against the Trump administration, like just last week.
They did, yeah. A TRO. That's a significant countermove.
So what did that restraining order do?
It basically put a temporary halt on the Agriculture Department cutting certain federal funds based on these Title IX violation claims.
Okay, wait. So the TRO wasn't about the core issue of transgender athletes and Title IX itself?
Not directly, no. That's a really important distinction. Maine's argument for the TRO, as reported, was basically procedural.
How so?
They argued the administration was trying to cut funding, specifically some school administrative and tech funds, without following the proper federal procedures and due process required by law. Sort of like a legal technical foul, if you will.
Gotcha. So they challenged how the funding was being cut, not necessarily the underlying reason the administration wanted to cut it, at least not in that specific legal action.
Exactly right. That lawsuit followed those earlier cuts to administrative and tech funds. So Maine pushed back on the process.
This whole situation just seems to be getting more intense. And it might not stop with Maine. Bondi hinted at that.
That's a key takeaway, yeah.
Yeah.
Bondi specifically mentioned that similar actions might follow in other states. She even named names.
Ooh.
Minnesota and California were the top two that should be on notice, according to her statement in the report.
Wow. Okay, so this really does suggest a wider strategy.
It looks like it, a strategy by the DOJ to enforce their specific interpretation of Title IX nationwide.
Which really underscores why this Maine case is so worth watching. It's not just some local dispute. It could genuinely reshape women's sports across the country and clarify, or maybe complicate even further, how Title IX gets applied here.
Absolutely. This whole thing forces us to grapple with some really complex questions about fairness, about equal opportunity in sports today. You know, the traditional sex-based separation in sports is being challenged by evolving understandings of gender identity.
And this lawsuit is right at the center of that tension.
Precisely. It's a direct result of that clash.
So if we try to sort of pull all this together, what's the absolute core conflict here? It really sounds like a fundamental disagreement over Title IX, right? How this law meant to stop sex discrimination applies when we talk about transgender athletes in women's sports.
That sums it up well. You've got the DOJ, guided by that executive order, saying protecting women's sports means ensuring only biological females compete on those teams. They frame it as preventing discrimination against women, ensuring fairness, even safety.
And on the other side?
On the other side, you have Maine, pushing back, challenging the Fed's authority and methods, likely operating under a different definition of discrimination in this context. Governor Mills see him in court, and the state's legal moves show they aren't just rolling over.
Right. It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
It does.
When you look at these different views, the legal tangles, the strong feelings, what does fairness actually mean here? In sports participation, it's tough.
It is tough. And thinking about the potential fallout, what are the consequences down the line? For student athletes, for schools everywhere, as these different interpretations of Title IX get debated and fought over.
Yeah, definitely a conversation that's far from over. Something to keep watching for sure.